Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into the material you provided. It's a really raw, unfiltered look at 1930s Paris.
Yeah, and the source is fascinating. It's this collection of really personal anecdotes, these wild character sketches, philosophical bits, and just, sensory overload sometimes.
It definitely gives you a window into a very particular world.
It's not really a conventional story, is it? It's more like a torrent of consciousness. The perspective is jarring, sometimes pretty shocking, but undeniably vivid, very singular.
Exactly. It's like peering through someone else's eyes at this specific kind of chaotic moment in time. That's the shortcut we're getting here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission in this deep dive is really to navigate this stream of words with you, pull out the most striking insights from this material, and help you understand the unique lens it's using to view this world.
Right. And you should prepare yourself for a journey that swings pretty wildly. You get moments of strange beauty, then crushing squalor, dark humor, and some really brutal frankness.
All seen through this unmistakable viewpoint.
Definitely. It's all there in the pages you shared.
And nowhere is that viewpoint clearer, I think, than in the people who show up in this world.
Mhm.
The source material is just packed with individuals described with this distinct, often brutally honest, and sometimes, deeply disturbing frankness.
Yeah, these aren't polite introductions. They're quick, raw sketches. They're designed to give you this visceral, immediate impression.
Okay, so let's start with Tanya. She's presented as this central figure, described as bursting with it, full of sap, really full of life.
Mm-hmm.
But what's immediately striking, and you flag this in the material, is how that life force is put right next to the narrator's intensely graphic and frankly violent sexual fantasies about her. Wanting to ream out every wrinkle, shoot hot bolts, make her ovaries incandescent, even imagining she could take on stallions, bulls, rams. It's extreme.
It's a powerful contrast, isn't it? Because on one hand, you hear about her loving the adagio, playing the piano, this seemingly, conventional person.
Right.
But then, boom, you're plunged into the narrator's internal world where she becomes the subject of these almost mythological, violent desires. The insight there is perhaps how the narrator's own internal chaos just immediately kind of overwhelms the external reality of other people.
Then there's Sylvester, Tania's husband. He gets labeled the sick dramatist who just talks and talks.
And the language used to describe his words is incredibly crude in the source, comparing them to warm piss or like a busted bladder.
Wow.
And it's not just being crude for the sake of it. It feels like the source is conveying this utter contempt.
Yeah.
Sylvester's focused on these abstract intellectual things, the manifesto, a pluralistic conception.
Right, ideas.
Yeah, ideas. But the narrator just reduces him entirely to this base bodily function.
Yeah.
Viscerally sees him as pissing on the woman I love.
And there's that detail about him putting a fence around Tanya.
Yes. And the narrator's reaction can't put a fence around a human being.
Okay.
It's such a stark image for trying to possess or control someone. Really telling.
Moving on, we meet Elsa. She's the German woman who makes breakfast in one part. Associated with this deep melancholy, singing melancholy songs.
Mm-hmm. And she has this hidden life too, right? Writing letters to a lover, off in Italy.
Yeah, and there's that brief, almost accidental sexual encounter described. The narrator notes feeling a little sorry for her.
And that unsettling detail she mentions about Berlin women and syphilis, it just weaves that pervasive sense of decay, that underlying threat, even into these really brief encounters. It connects individuals back to the bigger themes in the source,
It really does. Then there's Lona. She's another figure described with this extreme, almost exaggerated frankness about her sexuality.
Yeah.
The anecdotes are, wild.
Wild is putting it mildly, involving telephone booths and toilets, using candles, Roman candles, and doorknobs.
Good grief.
The source really leans into hyperbole there, calling her a wild ass, claiming not a prick in the land big enough for her, using terms like laboratory cunt, saying men went inside her and curled up.
So what's the insight there? Is it just exaggeration?
Well, it seems less about Lona herself, maybe, and more about how the narrator or the world being described perceives or mythologizes female sexuality, turns it into something almost monstrous or clinical.
Right.
And then there's that note that she was a liar, like claiming she never bought a bed for her King Carol. It adds another layer. Is any of this even real, or is it all performance and myth-making?
Interesting. Okay, Van Norden. He's a recurring character. Kind of perplexing.
Definitely perplexing. His apartment is described with these bizarre details: that huge mirror covered with green gauze and tipped, a baby carriage filled with books, handlebars just resting in the corner.
It's very strange.
And the strangeness extends to how the narrator perceives him. There's that bizarre dream recounted, Van Norden with a woman crouching, and that incredibly vivid, surreal image of his penis lying on the sidewalk the size of a man's forearm.
Wow.
Van Norden is often shown sort of swinging his distress like a dingy lantern. And one of the most revealing things, though crude, is his view on women based on age. A young cunt is an investment. An old cunt is a dead loss.
Oof. That's bleak. And his interactions with Bessie are just as strange, inviting her to stroke his penis, shaking it like a dinner bell, and they're both laughing.
Yeah, it feels like a moment where the sheer absurdity of their lives just surfaces, mixed with that kind of raw desperation, maybe?
Okay, then Carl. Introduced as someone prone to anxiety, having an Anglo-Saxon crisis.
And your sources detail this elaborate correspondence he has with a woman referred to with that very blunt phrase, the rich cunt Irene.
Carl's nervousness before meeting Irene is depicted with these striking, almost pathetic physical details. He's trembling, needs to be walked around the block.
Pissing in his pants, the source says.
Yeah, and his glance is compared to a dog with a noose. He even desperately asks the narrator to substitute for him.
The insight there might be how the source portrays the sheer physical and psychological toll of desire and social expectation. It just reduces him to this bundle of frantic nerves.
Then there's Marlowe, a drunk character described with a preservative instinct for survival, always managing to get by somehow.
Right, there's that anecdote about him pretending to go blind, a performance Carl apparently sees right through.
And the source shows Marlowe getting back at Carl by spreading gossip, seeming to relish Carl's misfortune, croaking, "They be hard times."
It's a glimpse into those cynical, almost predatory relationships that exist in this struggle for survival, isn't it?
Absolutely. But the material also notes a sudden, real attack he has later, and his desire to go back to San Francisco suggests even his resilience has limits.
True. Nenantati is next. Associated with a strange, dumpy apartment on Rue Lafayette, these bizarre ablutions.
And a complete inability to work. Hasn't done a stroke of work for years, apparently.
His survival relies entirely on praying for money. The source Riley calls it a commercial relationship with the deity.
Huh.
He talks about pearls, seems to exist outside of normal time, claims to sleep 92 hours in 3 days.
92 hours.
Yeah. And the anecdote about a book Kepi brought him, described as a fine book about the fucking, just adds to that sense of a world where the sacred and the profane, the bizarre and the mundane are constantly rubbing up against each other.
Kruger's another figure, a painter who hosts his narrator, despite his disruptive habits.
Right. The text recounts the story of the narrator falling ill in Kruger's studio right before an exhibition. It highlights Kruger's frustration, imagining giving him a clout in the jaw.
But the really powerful detail there is the narrator wanting to just die comfortably there rather than be moved.
It's such a bleak statement, isn't it? About finding just a small measure of peace, even in the most uncomfortable circumstances.
Finally, there's Swift, another painter described with a ferocious quality, a single thought in his head, but paint.
And there's that striking anecdote about his mistress, who's also a painter, apparently with more talent.
And Swift's crude critique of her work, particularly a painting of nude where his brush supposedly got stuck in the cunt.
Yeah, that anecdote feels like it distills a larger insight from the source about maybe artistic ego and the male gaze. He's described as idealizing her face, but depicting her body grotesquely. Her bosom was distended, swollen with sewer gas. She seemed swimming in a menstrual sea.
It suggests this real disconnect, doesn't it, between idealization and this distorted, almost repulsive view of physical reality. Or maybe it's a projection of the narrator's own stuff onto the artist's work.
Could be. It's complex.
So running through all these intense character portraits, as you point out from the source material, is this pervasive theme of poverty, the constant, often humiliating struggle for just basic needs. Hunger is a recurring physical presence.
Absolutely. You see the narrator skipping lunch, having a terrific hunger after breakfast, eating oatmeal as an hors d'oeuvre at Surge's just to fill the void.
Attending a concert on an empty belly.
Right. The insight is how hunger isn't just physical. It's this constant mental preoccupation that just shapes your whole existence.
And the jobs described are tough, sometimes demeaning. There's that worst job, writing and proofreading a thesis for a deaf-dumb psychologist.
Though the source notes that one at least provided an American breakfast, which was a rare luxury.
Yeah. Then needing to cut proofreaders to pay expenses at the Ritz, or needing credit just to get by.
And that struggle for something as simple as firewood in Dijon, having to hunt for firewood like an Arab. These details really underscore how survival requires this constant effort, often resorting to desperate measures, highlights the precariousness of life in this world.
Those vignettes of desperation you included are really poignant. The people in Dijon department stores just trying to get warm or find someone to buy them coffee, looking a little crazy with the cold and the loneliness.
And that scene at the brothel with the prostitute, it highlights the focus on the 15 francs as the primal cause of things.
The underlying motive.
The non-negotiable motive for the encounter, yeah. The source explicitly compares it to a state of war. The insight is pretty stark. In this world, basic human connection is often just reduced to a transaction. The driving force is sheer economic necessity.
And this harsh reality is sometimes contrasted with observations of perceived wealth or stability, like the rich American cunts with paint boxes, who seem oblivious.
Or the idea of a proofreader's job offering some kind of security, allowing you to expose yourself to infection without fear, which is a really dark kind of freedom, isn't it, linked to just having enough money.
Yeah, it is. So this brings us to how Paris itself is portrayed. Based on the sources you shared, it functions less as just a location and more as this complex reflection of the narrator's internal state.
Definitely. The initial observations are striking, feeling suffocated by the water, reflecting a forgotten world, the intellectual trees nourished by paving stones.
The dismounted gargoyles, the monsters, old people, idiots, cripples seen in the park. The city is immediately presented as this place of decay, artificiality, hidden strangeness.
And the source doesn't shy away from the city's hidden corners, the squalor. Describing the fetid stench of the 13th arrondissement, the smells of stale piss and formaldehyde.
But what's fascinating is how these are somehow mentioned as being compounded with pleasure.
That contradiction. It suggests this complex, maybe perverse relationship the narrator has with the city and its decay, finding something compelling even in the repulsive. And we hear about the run-down studios, the dingy rooms characters like Nanantati and Van Norden live in. Squalor is just deeply ingrained in these lives.
There's also this sense that Paris attracts a certain type of person, as the source suggests. The narrator concludes Paris is where the tortured, the hallucinated, the great maniacs of love come.
Feeling that here, at the very hub of the wheel, you can embrace the most fantastic, the most impossible theories. The insight seems to be that Paris isn't just geographical, it's a crucible for extreme personalities and ideas.
But this vision also includes a darker perspective, painting the city as a place where the world reveals itself as a mad slaughterhouse.
Where the treadmill stretches away to infinitude, that sense of being trapped in a meaningless existence, in a blind alley at the end of which is a scaffold.
And the pervasive imagery of disease syphilis, cancer described as written in the sky.
Suggesting that decay and doom are just fundamental aspects of reality in this city, according to this view.
Yet, amidst all this squalor and darkness, you find these moments of unexpected beauty or significance in the source. Like the driver looking at the river and thinking, ah, spring is coming.
A simple thought, almost cliched, but the source suggests this feeling of his Paris, this personal connection to the city's fleeting beauty, is what distinguishes the true Parisian, regardless of wealth.
And there's the narrator's own feeling of great exultation at the side of the river, affirming this deep, almost inexplicable wish to never leave, despite everything.
Yeah. So, beyond the characters and the city, the source material you provided is full of these surprising vignettes and really disturbing imagery. Moments that stick with you, challenge conventional reality. These are the deep cuts that highlight the raw, unfiltered nature of the perspective.
The incident at the brothel, for example. That shocking discovery of the two enormous turds floating in the water of the bidet.
Right, and the madam's hysterical reaction, frightful, a pig, and the poor Hindu boy's distressed explanation.
And later, the source comes back to this seemingly repulsive incident, with the narrator musing on it as a potential miracle.
What's the insight there? It seems to challenge our conventional ideas of what's sacred or significant, suggesting that the truly undreamed of, the miraculous, might be found in the most unexpected, even grotesque places.
The death of Peckover, the proofreader, is another one. Darkly humorous and pathetic from your sources. Falls down the elevator shaft.
And his dying focus is on groping for his false teeth.
The cynicism that follows is powerful, too. The narrator and Joe's reaction to the performative grief of his colleagues versus their own murderous silent contempt.
It's not just a morbid anecdote, is it? It's an insight into the source's view of human hypocrisy, the cold reality beneath social appearances.
Then there's that intense scene involving Fillmore's escape, He needs help fleeing Paris because of his complicated relationship with Jeanette, who's pregnant and tellingly has the clap.
Yeah, the whole sequence is full of these telling details. Fillmore trembling at the bank, the narrator paying for a last square meal but using Fillmore's money.
Right, using his money, the abrupt farewell of the station, and the narrator tearing up a postcard afterwards in this delicious stupor.
And Fillmore's reflections on hating France, calling it cruel and mercenary, being sick of it, and his sense of his American identity, can't become European overnight. It adds another layer to that expatriate experience.
The insight maybe being the messy, complicated nature of loyalty, escape, identity when you're faced with desperation and disease.
Exactly. And the source is just peppered with these truly bizarre, surreal visions that break from reality.
Like the accordion man with his hands cut off.
The dead people trying to mount the gallows on a turning wheel. The Eiffel Tower fizzing champagne and built of numbers.
Great sprawling mothers of Picasso with spiders on their breasts, the body bursting, stars turning black, a gaping hole sinking.
These aren't just strange images thrown in. They feel like visual manifestations of the narrator's internal state, that pervasive sense of decay, absurdity, impending doom that colors his whole perception of the world, blurs the line between external reality and the psychological landscape.
So finally, woven throughout all these observations of external reality and the sources you provided, are the narrator's more abstract reflections on life, art, and, well, what you might call the void.
Yeah, the narrator's view of himself is unflinching, often self-deprecating, feeling like an intestine because he thinks of food all day.
A slave.
A slave, later feeling ejected from the world like a cartridge, or realizing he walks the streets knowing he is mad, possessed. These self-descriptions offer an insight into this profound sense of alienation, maybe a lack of control.
And there's that recurring idea of decay and a need for destruction that emerges. The world seen as dying piecemeal, needing a coup de grace.
Civilization viewed as dry, fucked-out crater. It suggests this deep cynicism about progress or salvation, seeing annihilation as maybe the only logical outcome.
The source delves into this concept of the obscene, too, suggesting that the obscene horror, the dry, fucked-out aspect of things, are fundamental to civilization itself.
Right. The insight there is this radical idea that true creation, or maybe true understanding, has to dive beneath the pleasant surface, go right to the open wound, even if only blood and pus gush forth. It's a philosophy that kind of equates truth with the raw, the repulsive, the damaged.
And that connects strongly to the idea of the internal and external mirroring each other, feeling the city palpitate as if it were a heart just removed from a warm body.
Suggesting the city isn't just seen, it's felt as this living, suffering entity, reflecting that internal chaos.
The source also explores the nature of reality, perception, describing a moment of utter clarity where the illusion of time and space is lost. Everything feels supremely justified.
A fleeting glimpse of meaning found outside conventional understanding, maybe. And like we talked about with the bidet incident, there's the idea that the most miraculous things are the undreamed of ones, hidden in plain sight, often in the most unpleasant corners of existence.
And it's clear the narrator's perspective is informed by a whole range of literary, artistic references, Strindberg.
Associated with that wild carnival of maggots, the eternal duel of the sexes, the dance of death, Paris as a place for tortured artists.
Rabelais, Dante, Leonardo, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Picasso, Molly Bloom from Joyce, Havelock Ellis.
Yeah, these aren't just name drops. They seem to be touchstones for understanding the themes decay, desire, absurdity, the struggle for artistic expression within this whole chaotic world.
And that pervasive imagery of decay and disease throughout the material. Syphilis, cancer, gangrene.
Pestle and mortar, dung heap, withered bodies, scum, dirt, putrefaction.
It isn't just descriptive, is it? It reflects this fundamental worldview presented in the text. One that sees the world as inherently infected, breaking down.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has certainly taken us into the world presented in the material you provided. It's raw, uncomfortable, often grotesque, yet strangely compelling, all filtered through this unique, unfiltered literary voice.
And it's crucial, I think, to remember that this is a view, one intensely subjective perspective presented in the source material on life in Paris during that time. It's not necessarily objective truth or the only way to see the world.
So for you listening, how does this intense, unfiltered look at desperation, desire, decay, struggle, as presented in the sources you explored, how does it challenge or maybe confirm your own perceptions, your perceptions of the world, or maybe the challenges that artists and individuals face just trying to survive and make sense of it all?
Yeah, and consider the narrator's view that the world needs to be blown to smithereens, that knowledge should hit below the belt right at the ugly gash. What does it truly mean to see the world, as this source tries to, in all its perceived ugliness and decay? And what kind of creation, what kind of understanding can possibly emerge from embracing that vision? Or maybe reflecting on the source's idea of the miracle of the turds in the bidet. Where might you find the truly undreamed of moments or insights hidden within the mundane or perhaps the uncomfortable aspects of your own life?